Hey, it's me Lex, coming at you with something a little different. This video is going to be quick and concise. This is a homebrew system that I have developed and have been playtesting a little bit in private and a little bit with my players, and so far it has been quite good. I have on my side felt it to be both balanced and enjoyable, but that's up for you to decide whether it fits your table. The subsystem I've developed is spell checks, and the pitch is to put the power of rolling dice and determining the outcome of your spells back in the hands of spellcasters without breaking the game. How we do this is whenever you are about to cast a spell that targets a save, fortitude, reflex, or will, obviously, you can declare that you are instead casting it with a spell check. When you do, you roll a d20 with a modifier equal to your spell DC minus 11, so this is one lower than your spell attack modifier, and you target the matching save DC of the enemy that you're attempting to cast the spell on. The results of the spell are then inverted, so if you critically succeed at your spell check, the enemy is going to suffer the critical failure effects of the spell, and that truncates across all 4 tiers of success. The default for all spells is normal resolution, so you need to declare that you want to make a spell check to do so. Spell checks are not attack rolls, and they are not skill checks. The only modifiers they have are those granted explicitly to them, as from the aid action. Enemies cannot use spell checks. Anytime a save against your class DC would be invoked, like from Firearms Critical Specialization, you can make a class check using the exact same system, just your class DC minus 11 instead of your spell DC minus 11. Any feature that would modify a save modifies spell checks in the same way. So if they would improve success to critical success on fort saves, they instead reduce fortitude targeting spell checks from failures to critical failures, so on. This also applies to things like a +1 to all saves versus magic, things like that. And then aiding a spell check should be incredibly hard. The go-to standard is that the aider must also be capable of casting spells. They suffer a penalty if they can't cast the same tradition of spells, and the result of their aid cannot exceed a success unless they also expend a spell slot of a rank at least 1 lower than the triggering spell. These are playtest guidelines and not necessarily the perfect settling point. I'm considering taking away the ability to hero point or aid these checks entirely, but as is, it has not produced any issues with the system, and I'd recommend giving it a shot in your own games. For a quick demonstration, I have over here some very mediocre automation that I've coded into Foundry Virtual Tabletop. This is mostly to make it convenient. You can find that in my GitHub link in the links section on my YouTube page. I've dragged that onto Rutherford here. He's the spellcaster that I'm going to be using to demonstrate today. And I've dragged a couple of creatures over here. A Wild Hunt Scout that has peak will but low fortitude, and a Lich that also has peak will but low fortitude but at a much lower level point. So Rutherford here could cast, say, and I should have chosen a good spell before, but let's say Command. Rutherford here could cast Command at the Wild Hunt Scout, telling it to drop prone or what have you. And then this Wild Hunt Scout would need to make a DC 40 will save. It succeeds and thus has no effect. Alternatively, however, Rutherford could utilize a spell check on a command, which instead of using the save of the Wild Hunt Scout, he would make a will spell check. And the automation I have is automated, but it targets the will DC of the creature. And the -1 below a spell attack roll is because the system favors the roller in ties. If you match a DC, you succeed. So therefore, to emulate the fact that a save matching the DC would succeed, you matching should fail. And so just putting a -1 penalty onto this, make sure that the math remains exactly identical. If you don't allow your players to re-roll or modify their results here at all, then all this does is allow them to roll the dice. And this is something that at least I personally have found to be very enjoyable. But let's see here. So Rutherford is going to make this spell check against the Wild Hunt Scout. And look at this. This is a perfect example of how it can feel great. Rutherford here has rolled a natural 20. This means that it is a critical success for him, which makes the result of the spell invoke the critical failure effect on this Wild Hunt Scout. So on its next turn, it has to use all of its actions to obey his command. It feels great. It's very fun to have your players succeed by rolling their own dice, or even just give them the control and the engagement of being able to do so. As for the pitfalls, certainly if you do allow hero points and aiding, even with my guidelines, it does make spellcasters stronger. It does build up a little bit more possibility for them to kind of fish out results that they want. I have not seen this become a problem. I have in fact seen this in my rudimentary real play testing and a lot of testing in isolated scenarios like this, where I set something up and then I play through it, that it's completely fine because the math is identical and all that changes at the basis of it is who's rolling the d20, you or the enemy. It feels great. Here for the Lich, Rutherford is going to cast the slow spell. And now, once again, we could either resolve this with the Lich making a fortitude save, in which case that is a failure. He's going to be slowed 1 for a minute. Or Rutherford could make a fortitude spell check against this Lich. And he's actually going to nat 1 there, which is still only a failure. And so here, for example, the Lich failure would give the failure result, because that is just how saves work, slowed 1 for 1 minute. Rutherford's failure here corresponds to the success effect on the spell. So the Lich would be slowed 1 for 1 round with the spell check. However, Rutherford here is going to use a hero point, and this is where it gets fun, and debatably too strong. Up to you. Tailor as you will to your table. Reroll using a hero point, and that changes into a critical success. This Lich is now slowed 2 for 1 minute. And as you can see, the Lich is 6 levels lower than Rutherford, so this isn't too unexpected. To recap and summarize, spell checks are a method of putting engagement and fun back in the hands of your players by letting them be the ones to roll dice, succeeding on their spells on their own merits, perhaps role-playing it as them piecing together the spell and executing it properly, much in the way of some of the older editions of tabletop or some of the OSR games of nowadays where spell checks are still a thing. It has a couple of variable features in that you may or may not allow your players to aid spell checks to improve your spellcasting ability, even in an extremely limited manner. And you may or may not allow your spellcasters to hero point their spell checks to attempt to influence fate a little more in their favor. The last thing I will note with the automation that I have put out, it utilizes the spell attack roll, which means that it is in fact going to attempt to add things like bonuses to attack rolls to this. it should have no modifiers other than your spellcasting attribute, your proficiency, and the making a spell check modifier. Similarly, I did not implement any sort of automation for the bonuses to saves. So, for example, here, if Rutherford were to do a spell check attempting to do heal against this Lich, the Lich should have a save bonus against the vitality damage that he's taking, but that is not reflected here in the spell attack. It would be an immense amount of work to attempt to properly implement that, and I'm also not even sure how I would personally. I'm not too great of a coder. But if you're willing to work with the occasional need to work around something like that, because it's not all too common, then this is an excellent system that I would greatly recommend putting into your games, even in the most limited capacity. It's fun to roll dice. It's fun for players to roll high and succeed. It's engaging to see them roll low and role play it out. All sorts of things like that. I hope you enjoyed this one. See you next time. Let me know what you'd like to see in the comments below. Let me know if you enjoyed this or want to see more things like this where I cover some homebrew or things that I have made up. Have a good one.